Alright everyone, I figured we'd start off today talking about Rotten Tomatoes because the constant, and it's happened dozens of times at this point, it's pretty constant and it's getting more and more common. The constant use of Rotten Tomatoes as a form of propaganda is basically a microcosm of a much larger problem which affects other sites, certainly anything internet related. If you have a system where you have individual ratings, and then you also have a system where you have experts or the elites, oligarchs you could call them, simultaneously coexisting in a rating system, you're going to get problems like this. Now, first and foremost, before I get into what I mean about it being microcosmic, because it is, and I'll explain what Rotten Tomatoes is to those of you that don't know, keep in mind that down below there will be a pinned comment if you're watching this video on YouTube with links to 4 other video hosting sites that I use. Keep in mind, I make 2 exclusives a day and they don't end up on YouTube. Now, Rotten Tomatoes is a film scoring site, a film reviewing site. And so for movies, you'll have a critics section, and there's an aggregated score that the movie critics have given it. But famous people that get paid to review movies. Who pays them? That's part of the reason why this happens. Secondly, you have an audience score, and then usually that's a bigger sample size if anyone has watched the movie, although it's not always necessarily the case because some movies get squarely panned. In some cases, because of social progress, tolerance and diversity, etc., the audience score will be wildly different from the critic score. So you'll have a movie that's considered too gritty, outdated or something, the people at Sundance or Salon wouldn't enjoy it. The audience loves it. So, the next Mel Gibson flick or whatever is his Return of Jesus, Passion of the Christ Part 2, Revenge of Jesus or something. Audience will probably like it. The critics will probably hate it, and there will be a huge disconnect. It's similar to like with the Fauci movie. The Fauci movie has been panned by the audience that has seen it. They believe that it is fluffed up propaganda, boring nonsense, and it is. That being said, the critics love it. Oh my God, he's such a brave man. He's a sign of the times, best medical mind of the current year and century, and saving so many people and Drumpf bad. When you have this situation happen, Rotten Tomatoes typically comes out, sides with the critics, whether they're fluffing a movie up like with Fauci, or dumbing it, or attacking it because, it's not woke enough. Remember with Ghostbusters, the prequel there, the all-female prequel, that literally nobody liked, and it has like a single-digit score, I think, almost on Rotten Tomatoes? Critics liked it. Oh, how it's hip and good acting, and it's diverse and tolerant because there's no men in the lead, so that's diversity, and so we need to promote this. Same with Fauci. The movie is propaganda that's being made for a political reason. Let's call it what it is at this point. And the audience realizes that and hates it. Now what Rotten Tomatoes will do is come out and say, no, the audience is wrong. But they won't say that in the most explicit sense and say, well, the people that watch this movie are full of crap. Look at what Ebert says about it. No, they won't do that. What they'll try to do is convince people that this points to a larger problem of troll raids on the internet. People are manipulating information. This is basically the same as Russian propaganda. The manipulation and propaganda is the critic scores. And in essence, the site itself. It's conducting that on behalf of the makers of the movie, number 1, and of the political discourse that it seeks to promulgate, number 2. The audience sees through the propaganda, rates the movie as being garbage. That's the reality, that the movie is garbage. Or they like a movie because it's just entertainment, because that's initially what movies mainly were for, unless they were documentaries. And it's not woke, and therefore it's more fun to watch and gives people a thrill and is actually viewable by the average person. But the critics hate it. But the critics are the propaganda. Rotten Tomatoes and will say that it's the audience score. That's the fake news. That's the propaganda. We have seen this over and over and over again. We see this on news sites all the time. Why do you think that half of them close their comments out? The comments told the story that wasn't told in the actual story. It was full of actual fact-checking by people that in some cases are obsessed with the subtopic matter of any given news story. So fact-checking, criticism, sometimes quite significant criticism, to the point where some people went too far and started giving threats of violence and shit. But criticism of the lies, criticism of the structure of the article, lie by structure, Criticism of something major being left out of the article, lie by omission. Criticism of outright lies or half-truths within the article. This is a big thing. What does the news say? In defense of themselves, which is very, very, very convenient. Well, we had to close the comments because trolls kept harassing people. We had to close the comments because someone said the N-word. No, the reason they closed them had nothing to do with that. They enjoyed it just as much. I guarantee half of the journos on their own comment sections were trolling people under a pseudonym anyway. Remember, Mitt Romney used to do that as Pierre Delecto. That's not a joke. You remember when he admitted that he had a secret Twitter account just used to troll and harass people? Very interesting. And he's in the U.S. Senate and worth $100 million. I guarantee some low-level journal has no problem doing the same thing. People like to express themselves. If they're not allowed to, generally they go anonymous and they do it anyway, and you just don't know that it's them. I've done that many times before, by the way, on various websites, and still do occasionally. That's because I want to be able to speak freely, but I'm not allowed on certain sites. You get banned too many times and have to use a burner phone or something. Rotten Tomatoes is mainly just an entertainment site. This is what film generally is. But the propaganda that is involved with it is just a microcosm of a much larger problem. The government, the government will come out and tell you that the commentary made on the internet is by extremists and Russian propagandists, and they need to do more about it. But the thing is, that's actually not the propaganda. It's the backlash against the propaganda. The propaganda comes from big tech. Big tech doesn't fight disinfo, it creates disinfo, and the people fighting back against it are labeled disinfo agents. It's a form of projection. It's like 1984. It's newspeak. The government doesn't fight misinformation from other states. It creates misinformation. The other state creates misinformation, and they constantly hammer and criticize one another. And the people who are actually independently minded are constantly being bombarded by propaganda that's created by the government that claims to try to protect people from propaganda. But they all engage in making the propaganda. That is that the movie ratings on Rotten Tomatoes, oddly enough, are just a more entertaining and less malevolent microcosm of a problem that has engulfed the entire internet, whereby moneyed classes and experts and rich people and the politically connected and the politicians themselves, of course, and officials and so forth, are trying to convince the population to allow them to censor, but the premise is entirely false as to why that should happen. The groups that are doing the disinfo that actually should be looked into, and not by government regulation, and mainly they've been fact-checked for the last 20 years by the public anyway, they're the ones that are trying to create the censorship of everybody but themselves. So the main line, it's very convenient. It's sort of like, if I'm in some town, let's say that you have one of those corrupt towns in the Midwest where the sheriff is also the mayor, that sort of situation, and the good old boys run everything and foment ways to keep everyone else out of power. And I'm the gas station owner. I own 5 gas stations in town, and that's all that there are. It's a monopoly. There's no other gas station for 20 miles because, it's the cornfield country. We're in Kansas or something. And somebody else tries to come in, and I convince the town, hey, this dude's a screwy character, don't permit him. Don't allow him to develop this commercial property that he just bought. Well, I'm doing it for self-serving reasons. I just don't want to have to compete with his gas prices. I want to be able to get that extra 5 cents a gallon, and I'm making bank because I got all the fucking gas stations for 20 miles in any direction, and nobody's going to waste their time driving 20 miles just to save 5 cents a gallon unless they're a little bit on the weird side. And by the way, I have known people that do that, and I find it astonishing that they don't teach math in schools apparently anymore. But I'm doing it for self-serving reasons. I'm saying that, hey, we don't need another gas station. It's an eyesore in this location. I get old Mrs. Bixby to complain. And then I say that if he complains about it and says, no, it's just because his bastard wants his oil monopoly, his gas monopoly, and his Twinkie monopoly, because probably no grocery store and everyone has to buy food at the fucking gas station. And I sell the best burgers in town because there's no burger joint anymore because, COVID drove them out of existence. I'll just say, they're a conspiracy theorist. You malcontent. It's not about that. You just want to be able to build your eyesore. A little bit of projection, a little bit of propaganda and stupidity. Not exactly a doppelganger of what I'm talking about here, but you get the corruption element is the same. The attempt by big tech to create a monopoly is partially pushed by claiming that smaller tech firms, new tech firms, are guilty of the same things that happen on big tech. Videos of people killing themselves, child exploitation, human trafficking, drug sales, all these things happen on places like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. But Congress is very concerned if there's a single case of anything akin to that, in many cases barely anything to complain about, happening on BitChute or happening on Odyssey. By the way, BitChute had its Ofcom case dropped, so huzzah, they'll survive. Rumble, all of these other sites. If it happens there, it's a big problem. We've seen this before. We saw it. Multiple mass shooters, they have Twitter accounts, they're saying violent shit all day, but they simply had a presence on Gab, and obviously Gab is where they became radicalized. That's why they went on a shooting spree. It's the same thing. It's just that on Rotten Tomatoes, we're not talking about a great cultural zeitgeist of censorship that is politically meaningful. But you're still talking about censorship, and one little bit leads to another. And over the last few years, people have gotten more and more comfortable with the idea that either government or corporations themselves need to impede free speech and free expression because of disinfo. But they're the ones that created the disinfo to begin with, and people are none the wiser. You need to speak out against it, or eventually you lose your voice. That's about all. Peace out.